Oizdal. So after explaining the three levels of the idea of the letters that are considered written letters versus engraved letters on the surface versus engraved through and through, not only in the Olamus above, but also in the person's service to the Eibishter. The person's service to the Eibishter, there's the way of doing the service in such type of way where he and the avoida, he and the service that he's doing are two separate things. Then there's a way of doing the service in such type of way that he is completely one with it, meaning that his etzem nefesh is involved in the service of the Eibishter, because there is no interference, if you will, from intellect. He's not doing it because of intellect. And intellect, we said, is something that has to do with something external to the person. The essence of the person is beyond intellect. So therefore, any mitzvahs that are associated with intellect, like Eidus and Mishpatim, is not truly and completely united with the person. Therefore, the true expression of the person themselves is in the level of chukim, and that has to do related with hakika. It's completely engraved in them. It's completely part of them. Then we said, in chukim itself, there's the hakika me'aver la'aver, going through and through. That is like a chayk that is completely beyond all other chukim. The chayk of paraduma, which is so completely beyond the non-reasoning of all other chukim, and therefore it is a unity that's like the unity of me'aver la'aver. So now he's going to explain back to what we said before, that from the level of the Oisach Kika, Zois Chukas HaTorah, it has to come from the level of Chakika, from the level of Zois Chukas, it has to come down into Torah, into all the other mitzvahs of, from the level of Oisach Kika Lamaila, that this comes from a very high level. Like we said, there's the way it comes from the Oidin Sof, Shalifnat Simtzum, and so on. It has to come down here into our Torah as well. So we're going to explain that in relationship to what we've been talking about up to now. Oizdal. It's explained in the Torah. In the explanation, the words, this is the chukah of the Torah, that we have to draw down the level of Oisach Kika, the way Torah is in Mekoida V'Sharsha, like he said earlier in the Maimer, to come down here in that same fashion. Through the mitzvah paraduma, which is a level of a chukam, through that you draw down above the level of the engraving letters of the Torah. That actually from there, from that high level of the Isachik of the Torah, that's above and beyond, should come down here in letters of writing. Because the mitzvah paradum is inclusive of the entire Torah. Like it was explained previously in Ois Aleph, because that's what it means. Zois Chukas HaTorah, that we're saying the entire Torah, everything in Torah is like encapsulated in paraduma, because the whole Torah is based on Ratzai and Shoiv. Either some things are Ratzai, some things are Shoiv, mitzvahs loisa are Ratzai, mitzvahs asay are Shoiv, etc., etc. But paraduma, which has Ratzai and Shuv together, so that is encapsulating the entire Torah. So therefore, he says, also the idea of chayk, that it's a super rational mitzvah. In the idea of Zois Chuk Satoira, it's a decree from before me. You're not allowed to use and bring your mind into the situation. Torah has to come down in all the mitzvahs of the Torah. In other words, the Rebbe is drawing parallels over here, just like in the idea of Oisach Kika. Now, when it comes with the letters of engraving, we're saying that you have to draw down from that level of Torah, which is the letters of engraving, down here into the written letters, that they should be the letters of engraving even down here below. The same thing, the simple meaning of Chukas HaTorah, that it's a decree that's super rational. So that super rational decree, even though we said Para Aduma is the ultimate and exemplifies it. Yet we have to take that chukah and make it zois chukas ha-Torah. It has to come into the rest of the Torah. We have to bring that super rational aspect of Para Aduma into the entire Torah, even in mitzvahs of Eidos and even in mitzvahs mishpatim. They should also have this level of the super rational aspect, as the Rebbe is going to explain. Line 26. The human al piyam much cost quakers might come out more. Maimer she'amar b'yud beis tammuz l'shnas ha'geulam. From the Frierdiker Rebbe said in the Maimer of the 12th of Tammuz of the actual year that it was redeemed, meaning of Tafresh Pei-Zayin 1927. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says over there in the Maimer, la'achrei shemagdim shemitzvos havayim nekrois become shames. After he prefaces the topic and the idea that Hashem's mitzvahs are called by different names. Eidos, chukim, mishpatim, testimonial mitzvahs, ceremonial mitzvahs, the decree mitzvahs, the mitzvahs that are civil laws, and he explains in that Maimer of Tafresh Pei-Zayin, mishpatim, hey mitzvahs shal pi aseichel chulum, that mishpatim are mitzvahs that are rational. V'chukim hem she'eina mal pi atam kim gzeres hakasuv, that the chukim are such mitzvahs that are not logical, they are super rational. It's a decree of the Torah. Like it says in Rashi on the pasuk Torah. Why do we call it chukah? It's a gzeira, it's a decree. Lefi sha'asatan ve'umas ha'olam ma'yinas Yisrael chulum, because the Satan and the nations of the world upset the Yidden, tease the Yidden, attack the Yidden and say, what are you doing this, etc. Therefore, he writes and calls it a chukah, because he wants to tell you, don't listen to them. This is something that's beyond understanding. So after that whole introduction, Frierdiker Rebbe in his Maimer of Yud Beis Tammuz Tafresh Pei-Zayin says, line 2 on page Yud Beis, that the void of the person is that fulfillment of the intellectual mitzvahs, the rational mitzvahs, should be specifically done with accepting the yoke of heaven, just like the mitzvahs that are super rational mitzvahs. The Frierdiker Rebbe lays down something very interesting, an interesting approach. Despite the fact that we have three different types of mitzvahs, essentially we could divide it into two, rational and super rational mitzvahs, still in all, even the rational mitzvahs, even the civil laws, etc., we need to fulfill it with the Kabbalah's oil, with the same submission to Hashem, as we fulfill the super rational mitzvahs, the mitzvahs of Para Aduma. So he says, behind this mitzvah, the mitzvahs, those mitzvahs that are comprehended rationally and intellectually, the reason why he fulfills it, though it's understood, though it's comprehended, still in all, why do I do it? I do it not because my rational mind tells me to do it, rather because they are the mitzvahs of Hashem. In other words, like this, giving maybe a simpler example. Let's say a parent tells their child to do something. Now, there's things that the child doesn't understand or doesn't agree with, and then there's things that the child understands or agrees with, etc. So there's two ways how the child can fulfill that directive of the parent. If he's a disciplined child, if he's a child that's used to listening to their parents regardless, so there won't be going through the child's mind, you know why I'm doing this? I'm doing this because it makes sense to me. No, just like they do the things that the parent tells them to do, regardless of their understanding, regardless of their comprehension, regardless of what makes sense to them. So even in cases where it does make sense to them, they also, their first thought is not, I'm doing this. Why? Because it makes sense for me to do this. It makes sense for me to eat before I go out, so I'm not hungry. No, they're in a mode that whatever the parent tells them, they do it because the parent tells them to do it. In a similar way, there are mitzvahs I don't understand, so I do them because of Kabbalah Soil, because I submitted myself to Hashem. But even those mitzvahs that I do understand, I could choose to do them because, well, this makes sense to me. But a Yid, the way the Frierdiker Rebbe says, there's actually an expression amongst Chassidim, maybe it's also from the Frierdiker Rebbe, a Yid is a Kabbalah's Olnik is a Yid. This is the very nature of a Yid, to be submitting himself to Hashem's will. So therefore, even the rational mitzvahs, even the mitzvahs that he can understand logically, that he may do on his own, like it says that we would have learned not to steal from an ant, we would have learned sneeze from a cat, etc. I'm not doing it because of that. I'm not doing it because of the logical reason. I'm doing it with Kabbalah Soil as well. So then he says further, line 7, we could say that this is the inner reason and explanation that the Frierdiker Rebbe in his Maimer brings the Pirush Rashi in the beginning of our parsha, Chukas HaTorah, that it says over there that we are doing it as a gzeira. Let's skip the brackets for a moment. We'll get back to it. Let's skip down to line 13. That the intention of the Frierdiker Rebbe by bringing this Rashi is he wants to bring a proof to what it says in the continuation of the matter. That also intellectual mitzvahs a person has to fulfill with the acceptance of the yoke of heaven, just like one fulfills the super rational laws. From the explanation that that the mitzvah of paradum is considered zois chukas hatoira, we said. It's not chukah and para, zois para, that only paraduma is a choik. No, the choik of paraduma manifests itself or comes down that also the rest of the Torah is done in a way of a choik. Mucha, from this it's derived. All the mitzvahs that they are the detail. When you have a klal, then you have the prat. We said that the paraduma is the klal because it's rotzi v'shoib, so everything else is considered the details of it. One has to fulfill them out of the acceptance of the yoke of heaven. That's totally beyond intellect. Just like one fulfills the choik of paraduma, that is the klal. The details come from and are similar to the general thing. So since paraduma, we said, is the general part of the Torah, because it's rotzi v'shoiv, and all the other Torah, parts of the Torah and mitzvahs are either rotzi or shoiv, so therefore they're considered like details of the general aspect. So just like the general part of the Torah, the paraduma, one fulfills out of total and complete Kabbalah soil, submission to the will of Hashem, so to all the other mitzvahs, even the mitzvahs that are rational and explainable, need to be fulfilled, not because of my understanding, but we have to fulfill it out of Kabbalah's oil, submitting myself to the will of Hashem. Now, let's go back to the brackets on line 9. And the Rebbe says another reason why we bring in, why we could say the Frierdiker Rebbe brings in Zois Chukas HaTorah in this. Why does the Frierdiker Rebbe feel the need to bring in the pasuk of Zois Chukas HaTorah over here in this topic? It says Noisef Lakach. This is an addition. In other words, the reason we just now gave is to bring about Zois Chukas HaTorah, that the entire Torah has to be done in a way that it's super rational. Another reason why he brings this in, but Noisef Lakach, in addition to this, Zoi Parshas HaShavua Samoch L'Inyan HaGeula. Parshas Chukach is the parsha of the week that's close and is read in proximity to the Geula of the Frierdiker Rebbe. the Rebbe often brings from the Shalah Kodesh that the Yom Tovim that fall out, even Yom Tovim of later times, Yom Tovim the Chachamim established that fall out in the Parsha of the week have to do with the Parsha of the week. This is a little bit past the Parsha of the week, but the point is there's a connection with the Parsha of that Shabbos and what follows afterwards. So he says, the Koisib b'mforish ha-tevois zois Chuksa Torah. And the Frierdiker Rebbe in his Maimer writes explicitly the words, this is the Chukah of the Torah. Shemetargeminon dog zeiras oiraisa. That the Targum, the Onkelos translates it, this is the decree of the Torah. So Gzeira, Gzeiras oiraisa could also mean Sheroim is l'gzeira al ha-Torah. It hints to a decree against the Torah, upon the Torah. Kamuva besfarim, like it's brought down in Sfarim. There is an amazing thing that the Magen Avram brings down in Sim Tov Kuf Pei. The Rebbe, on the side note, he brings down the Bir B'derech Efsher. He says that there was a custom by some people to fast on Friday Parshas Chukas, because then 20 wagon loads of Sfarim, particularly Gemaras, were destroyed in France, were burnt in Paris. I think it was like in 1200s, the 1300s. And this is obviously a great tragedy. Before the printing press, everything was handwritten manuscripts. Can you imagine complete sets of Gemaras being hunted down and searched through all the Jewish communities? And it was a rare item. It cost obviously a lot of money to be able to write the entire Shas down by hand before the printing press. And all of these were destroyed. And all of these were burnt by the Catholic Church and the French government, Yimach Shemam. And this was because of that, some individuals, the Magen Avraham said, fast on that Friday, Parshas Chukas. He goes on to say, why do they mark it on the day of the week instead of the calendar date? Because the Parsha of Chukas hints at it. Because it says, Zois Chukas HaTorah, this is the decree against the Torah. And that week was a decree against the Torah that the Torahs, the Gemaras were burnt up. So that is an idea that has to do with the Geula and the destruction that the Frierdiker Rebbe was suffering for the Torah. And it was a decree against Torah in the Soviet Union. And he was redeemed from that decree. So therefore, that's another reason why the Frierdiker Rebbe brought in the Maimers, Zois Chuksa Torah, because they were suffering then against a decree against the Torah in the Soviet Union. Okay. So now the Rebbe, let's go back to the text of the Maimer. Actually, if you have any questions, you could ask now. We'll go on in a moment. Any questions? Okay, we're continuing on page Yud Beis, line 22. So now, the Rebbe is going to explain this a little bit more in detail. What does it mean, and why is it so that even mitzvahs that we perform intellectually, rational, not we perform intellectually and rationally, but are rationally understood, intellectually understood, the way I perform the mitzvahs is performed in a way of Kabbalah's oil. I don't do it because I understand it. So line 22, page Yud Beis. The explanation this is, though the distinction of these three different types of mitzvahs, ceremonial or testimonial mitzvahs and civil laws and super rational decrees, is Torah is the one that differentiates this. This is not something that we just decided that there's such things. Torah itself says that there are mitzvahs that are super rational, and they are called chukim. And then there's those mitzvahs that do have a reason. In the Krois, but Torah, Eidus, Mishpatim, and in Torah they are called those mitzvahs that are testimonial, they are celebrating certain events in Jewish history, and those mitzvahs are civil laws. When Nimtza comes out, that the fulfillment of the mitzvahs of the Torah that are called Eidos has to be done because we are, or not, it is done to commemorate and to mark and to bear testimony to certain events. Like he brings on in footnote 28, you should keep my Shabbos because it's a sign between me and you, that I took you out of Mitzrayim, or I signed that I created the world. Or it says that you will sit in Sukkot because, so you should know that I took the Eden out of Mitzrayim. In other words, there's a purpose in the testimonial mitzvahs that we are testing to something. Hashem wants this to attest to something. Hashem wants this to bear witness to a particular event. So this is part of the Ratzon of the Eibishter. And also the fulfillment of the mitzvahs that are intellectual should be done because intellectually I am understanding how bad it is. He brings from the Rambam. The Rambam in the footnote he brings. The Rambam says that the Chazal say that a person should not say, I do not like, I do not want, I can't handle eating non-kosher meat. I do not handle eating chazer. But a person should say, I would like to, I would want to eat it, but what should I do? But Hashem tells me not to. So the Rambam says this is only by mitzvahs that are not logical, that are not rational. But when we talk about a mitzvah that we would call immoral, stealing, killing, the person would not say, well, I would chas v'shalom steal, but the only reason I don't steal is because Hashem told me not to steal. No. The Rambam says that means that I'm a mushchis. That means that I'm a disgusting person. Something that logically is bad and evil, a person should not say, I would do this, but Hashem told me not to. So what do we see from this Rambam? We see that mitzvahs that are logical, rational mitzvahs, we don't ignore the fact that it's rational. We don't ignore the fact that it's logical. The person needs to be feeling disgusted by, let's say, committing that aveda if it makes no sense, if it makes no sense to do it, or if it's logical not to do it, etc. So despite that Hashem imbued certain mitzvahs with the nature and with the attitude of edus or mishpatim. So the Rebbe goes on line 30, the very fact that the intellectual, rational mitzvahs have to be done because, and as a result of the reason. In other words, I need to be aware of the reason. It has to, like we said, the Rambam says it has to disgust me to do something that's logically and rationally bad. Still in all, top of page Yud Gimel, it also has to be in a way of accepting the yoke of heaven, that I am doing so because of my devotion to Hashem's will. Because Hashem decreed that the fulfillment of these mitzvahs are done out of a reason. So I'm sorry, that the mitzvahs, even though Hashem decreed that these mitzvahs should be a rational mitzvah, should be something that I understand, but with that it's a mitzvah that I understand, that is part of the decree of Hashem, that Hashem wanted me to understand. So therefore, when you trace it back, true, I do not want to do something immoral. I am by my nature, stealing is out of the question for me because it makes no sense, etc., etc. It's an immoral thing. And on top of that, I trace it back and I work it backwards, and I say, you know what? That itself, that Hashem made it understood to me, that itself, that I can appreciate how despicable it is to steal, that itself is the decree of the Eibishter. And this is the famous thing that Rebbe says why we're not supposed to go, even in civil laws, we're not supposed to go to Goyish courts, even if they actually judge exactly the way Jewish courts do it, because we need to recognize that behind the logic, there's Hashem's decree that this should come down into logic. Line 3 on top of page Yud Gimel, so too it's concerning the mitzvahs itself, also the supernal will that's enclosed in the mitzvahs that are testimonial mitzvahs, and the mitzvahs that are civil laws. It's really that will is an essential will, it's beyond wisdom. Ella gam zeh gzeireh milfonai. This itself is a decree from before me. That the will that's in these mitzvahs should also become enclosed in reason and rational understanding. This is a classic thing that Rebbe says, that all mitzvahs begin from Hashem's will. Whether it's a logical, rational mitzvah, or whether it's a completely super rational mitzvah. Some mitzvahs come down in their pristine state of being Hashem's super rational will. Some mitzvahs Hashem chose, for a reason known to him, that they should come down and be able to be understood. So even, let's say, the mitzvah of not stealing, it still started off, and at its core is Hashem's pure and unadulterated will, except it encloses itself in Chach. This is the inner reason for what it says. This is the chukah of the entire Torah. Even though Paraduma says Agam Paradumi close a mitzvahs, Shinyanam Ratzna Elyavil Torah Chachma. You could go even further over here. The Rebbe adds another kvetch. A mitzvah is a command. So that's first and foremost Hashem's will. But in the commands, there could be a command that comes into understanding, a command that doesn't come into understanding. Torah, the word Torah goes on learning Torah. Torah is Chachma. We're saying Zois Chukas HaTorah. The Para Aduma is the chukah not just of mitzvahs, it's not just the klolos of mitzvahs, but it's also the klolos of Torah, which is Chachma. Today, Lahadish to emphasize the idea of the decree is not just from the perspective of the mitzvah part of Eidus and Mishpatim, also that part of Eidus and Mishpatim, which is Torah, meaning it's understood, it's logical. Even those parts, that which came down into Chachma and intellect, and even the intellect itself. That's still an idea of chukah. It's a decree from before me. We'll stop over here. Any questions?